I just want to say hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation tonight. I am Kristen Swift, and I'm the VP of Programs for the PTSA. I have a current high school senior who is going to college next year. And I have another one that is a freshman in college this year as well, who took a gap year between high school and college. So he should have been there a couple years ago, but took a really good gap year. It was great. So after going through this process 3 times, because my oldest was not able to defer, so he had to apply again. So we've gone through this 3 years in a row, lucky me. After that, and talking to a bunch of my parent friends and hearing about what other people have gone through, we decided that we would put together this presentation. And I called on the wonderful ladies at Mosaic College Prep, Mariah, Bess, and Julie Fulton. I met them. My older kid went to the LA County High School for the Arts, and I used to run the college fair there. And I met Mariah and Julie there because they would come and speak to us and the students every year. So I called on them again, and they took the call only a few weeks ago, and we're still able to make it tonight, which is awesome. So thank you, ladies. I'm going to start the evening by bringing up slides that are direct quotes from my friends that have gone through this recently. And I put a call out on Facebook to get people's advice, like, what do you wish you knew a year ago? And I'm hoping this helps you. If you have already gone through this and your senior is figured out the college thing, you don't need to be here, because I know a couple of my friends were like, oh, I need to RSVP. And I was like, no, you're done. You're on your last kid. You could teach this. So what I'm going to do is I've made a slideshow. We're going to go through what people have said. There are a few things that I had Mariah and Julie look at it ahead of time. And so there are some things people say that they feel like was their experience, but we're also going to get Mariah and Julie's experience from it as well. Once I'm done going through the slideshow, I'm going to ask Mariah and Julie questions that had come in ahead of time, as well as a few of the questions that we came up with ahead of time that are things we think that probably a lot of people want to know. And then if you would also like to ask questions, you are welcome to put any in the chat at any time. My name on here is Questions Kristen. Just put it to the chat to me, and we will get to as many of your questions as possible about kind of what's next, what's going on. But we are going to end at 8:15 so that everybody can get to their evenings, walk their dogs, go to bed, whatever your routine is at about 8:15 at night. Watch Succession if you didn't watch it last night. I had to watch it last night, sorry, I did. The program is being recorded, so feel free to keep your camera off if you don't want to be in the recording, and let your friends know about it ahead of time. We'll have it released and probably in Mr. Eldred's Friday email by this Friday. So just to let you know. So here we go. Advice from the front line. Parents of current college-bound seniors weigh in to give you their advice. So I did categorize these a little bit. So these are mostly like choosing where to apply and finding the right fit. Now, remember, these are quotes from parents, so I'm not wording them at all. This is what they said. So it may be some of them are kind of harsh, but they're pretty direct in what they've gone through. So first one, evaluate a school's fit and be prepared for that to change. These kids changed a lot during the year. Like I said, my kid decided to take a gap year. We still had him apply that year because we didn't know if by April or May he was still going to want to take a gap year. So, and in the end, he's an actor, so he had to reapply because it was all audition based. But it was still really worth it, and the gap year was invaluable for him. Apply to a wide variety of schools. You may be surprised by the admissions decisions. If you talk to any parents of seniors, most kids I know are very surprised by their admissions decisions. There are places they were sure they should get into that they didn't. And there are other places that they got into that they were kind of surprised. And some just don't really get into any of the ones except, at all. I've heard of that happening. I know last year there were a couple of kids who applied to really hard schools and ended up going to PCC, which is an awesome option, but they didn't get into these really hard schools they applied to. This one may be unpopular, but your kid is not as great as you may think. So choose some realistic target schools so you have great options. I just thought that was funny because we all think our kids should get in somewhere, and it's just really competitive these days. Now, here's one that's a little bit iffy. Last year's stats and acceptance, GPA, et cetera, are not as relevant as each year it gets more competitive. So plan your list accordingly. That's what a parent says. Mariah and Julie said that last year's stats really are relevant because it's the best indicator of the school's acceptance trends, but that doesn't mean things can't change in a given year. So don't discount the statistics. That's why it's really important to have a thoughtful list of schools. You know, you want to have a few reaches, you want to have some that you really think you can get into, and then you want to have some safeties just to be sure. And we'll talk a little more about that. For those of you looking at Naviance is a really great tool for researching schools, except for the fact that it shows you that your kids should be able to get into Harvard and Yale because it doesn't have the average GPA on there. So when you start looking, they come up in your searches and it's really confusing. So just know, just because they're coming up does not mean it's a target school. Was not a target school for all of my children, for sure. Make sure the school has the major that your kid wants. If your kid knows what they want to do, make sure they've got the major. Some people actually had kids apply that they realized later didn't have a major because they just thought it was a cool sounding school or everybody else was applying. This is a really good one that I actually didn't even know about until after we applied. There's a thing called the Common Data Set. And you can Google that for schools to see the profiles of admitted students and what the priorities are for each school. This is a great way to see if your kid, based on their activities and academics and everything, should get into that school. And from what I've heard from other parents, it's pretty good and fairly accurate. Colleges do not define the kids or their parents. So visit and tour ones that your child might be interested in. Pay attention to the admit rate at all schools, because even if your child is highly qualified, they may still be disappointed by their admissions decisions. So you can kind of feel that the disappointment in the parents and the kids. It's a really hard time right now. If you see a high school senior, maybe don't ask them what's going on, because they still have till the end of the week to decide, and some of them haven't even decided yet. And it's just a really hard time because it's been very emotional not getting in or getting into where you didn't think you were, where you wanted to get in. It's just been really tough. So maybe just say, hope you're doing okay. Okay, so then with admissions, this one's kind of a long one, but I really liked this from a friend of mine. Decide how important it is for you and your child to have the best possible application versus the work, participate, and study at the level they're most comfortable with. This family made some suggestions, but basically let their son get the grades he wanted and get involved in the level he wanted. He set boundaries on how much work he was willing to put into a class and got a couple of Bs. This impacted his college results, but I don't think I'd do it any differently. It felt like his well-being and autonomy were more important. We didn't push it at all, and as a result, he wasn't as thrilled with his college choices. So you need to be clear on your values going into the process. So this is really interesting. This family, maybe he wasn't as super thrilled with his college choices, but he was able to do what he wanted to do through the college process and not get too stressed about it, and is going to a great college. At least I'm not sure which one, but I know this kid is going to has a couple really good choices. So they decided as a family that that's what they wanted to do. And I just thought that was a great piece of advice is, it might not be that Yale or something, but it's going to be good. GPA is more important than a high level class. I think it's generally better to get an A in honors class than a B in an AP. Now, this is not my quote, but I would have said the same thing. But Mariah and Julie would like to let you know that the level of rigor is still a huge consideration, as colleges do look for the opportunities available for students to take rigorous courses versus the classes they've opted to take. So while admissions officers will say with a wink that it's better to get an A in an AP class, when it comes down to a B in an AP class versus an A in an honors class, it's all contextual. It really depends on the other classes a student's taking and how they've otherwise challenged themselves. So none of this is an exact science or more of a math, I would say. Science is kind of not exact anyway, a lot of times, but I'd say it's not like 2 + 2 = 4 in the college world. It's so much like, maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. Hopefully you already know about early action and early decision. If you can apply for those, it's great. It significantly improves your odds, but what you need to know, these are early applications. Early decision means that you're it's a binding decision. You have to go to that school if you get in. Early action is really lovely if a school has it, because they just let you in early, but they still let you decide by May, which is so nice, because the really good thing about early action is your kid knows they're in a school. They know they're going to college. And sometimes you just need to know you're going somewhere, and that just takes off the pressure. Early decision, on the other hand, is like, my sister did early decision way back in the 80s. But she really wanted to go to Cornell University. So she got into Cornell University. And so she only had to do one application and she was done. It was beautiful. It was great. That was not my experience 4 years later. But she knew she wanted to go there. And so she applied early decision. She got in and she was done. So if you do know, it's great. My son this year, neither of the two schools that were kind of at the top of his list did any early. So he wasn't able to do early. So he just did everything regular. It's kind of a whatever you want to do. But I will say it is nice to apply early just to know you're in somewhere. That does feel good. But my kid wasn't ready to do essays that early. So they applied all regular decision this year. And it works out. If you're in the top 9% of your graduating class and you aren't accepted to other UCs, but you have applied to UCs, you're guaranteed a spot at UC Merced. That's really the overflow school right now, because not as many people want to go to that. But if you've gotten waitlisted or rejected from others, but you're in that top spot, you do get a spot. I think it's always UC Merced. Okay, so another one, essay is of primary importance. If you're going to put your money anywhere, put your money there. Now, Mariah and Julie do say that's true, but with a caveat. The most important component of a student's application will be their academic performance. However, in terms of where a student has the greatest opportunity to represent themselves, it's an essay. So just remember that. Cost. Cost is really fascinating when it comes to college. It's kind of like someone equated it to me to buying an airline ticket. So you can go on and you can get an airline ticket one day for $100, and the next week it's $200, and right before you fly, it's like $500 or something like that. And it's almost like that with college. I mean, it's not exactly, you're not going to be able to get the $100 ticket if you apply early, but you just have to think about cost, and because it's scary. So don't be afraid of the price tags of private schools, because many will offer good merit aid. So one really good piece of advice is, a lot of private schools do offer merit aid. Now, the caveat here that Julie and Mariah mentioned is evaluate if the private college offers merit aid. Not all of them do, but it's more likely to come from a school that offers it if your student is within or above the averages they tend to accept. The other thing is, my other son is an actor, and he ended up going to a school that they give merit aid to every single actor, because they have some kind of aid package on the side. So they give between $15,000 and $30,000 a year to every single kid that gets into that school. It was lovely. But again, that's a talent. That's something that you have to audition for. Those aren't everywhere, but do look for that, because that can get you into a school that you might not have been able to afford otherwise. Out-of-state public schools and private schools that offer merit may be more affordable than the UCs. So take a look at those, because you might actually be able to get it cheaper than going to a school here. Okay, if you don't know what the FAFSA is yet, the free application for federal student aid. In past years, apparently this is changing, but I put this on here anyway. Anyone who tells you that filling out the FAFSA won't take long is lying, and don't leave it to the end. So the CSS is also like the FAFSA. It's ways to apply for financial aid. A lot of times, even if you get merit aid, the schools want you to fill these out. They've been pretty gnarly to fill out in the past. The really good news is that they're changing it this year, and they say that it'll be a lot easier. We're really hoping, for all of your sakes and my younger son, myself in 4 years with my younger one, that it will be easier. They also are going to release it a little bit later this year. It's currently on track to be released around December. But that is something you really need to fill out if you want to try to get any kind of aid from the school. Even if you don't think you're going to get aid, if you make too much, they still want you to fill it out. So it's not a fun evening or a couple of days, however long it takes you. Don't let your kid pick a dream school without looking at the financials. I would say, don't let your kid pick a dream school. It's so hard when they pick a dream school because it's really hard to get into schools now, but especially without looking at the financials, that's really rough because it might not happen. Some schools guarantee no price increases for 4 to 5 years, which is huge. Some price increases I've seen up to 5% a year. University of Oregon is one of the ones that guarantee no price increases. So if it costs, now it's not a cheap school, but if you can get some merit aid and then they don't increase the price, it's like $60,000, $65,000 a year, but they won't increase that for as long as your kid is there for 4 or 5 years. Now, if your kid goes over that, they might increase it. But they won't increase that, which is amazing. It's a huge amount of money and something to definitely look at. Okay, and here's just some general wisdom. Remember, it's their educational journey and not ours. They have to show up every day to do the work. So it has to be something they really want to do. The letters of recommendation are a ridiculous process at any public school, as teachers are not compensated for them, nor is there a district policy about them. Start to approach teachers in the junior year. This is probably one of the most frustrating things for students because teachers are doing it on their own time, so they only do a certain amount of recommendations. And so if your kid has a teacher that they really like or a couple teachers they really get along with, have them approach them sometime soon and start talking about it. They probably won't write it yet, but I would at least have them approach it. When researching colleges, pay close attention to housing costs and whether housing is guaranteed. Sometimes it's more expensive to live on campus if you're in New York City, rather than getting an apartment with 4 friends the next year. But sometimes they make you live on campus the first year. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they guarantee housing for 4 years. Sometimes they only guarantee it freshman year, and then it's really hard. I've heard Santa Cruz is ridiculously hard to get campus housing or any housing off campus after, whenever you need to, because the whole area is so impacted. So just things to think about. Do not apply somewhere just because everyone else is. That's a hard one. Make sure to be up to date on vaccines. Many schools require that you are. That was one someone sent me today, and I was like, oh, right. So you got to make sure before they go that you've got all that information, because that's going to be part of the stuff you have to fill out. So this is one I did with one of my kids, and my other kid didn't want to do it, but I thought it was invaluable, which is we created a, Kristen College at gmail.com. It wasn't Kristen, but it was my kid's name, at gmail.com. And everything for applications went through that email address. The really nice thing was I could check that email address. I had the password as opposed to trying to go to their own personal email. And it was so nice because I could look at things and go, hey, did you see that? And you might have a kid who's going to check their email every day, and maybe you don't need that. But I had one who didn't. And even actually with my senior now, at a certain point, we were getting so many emails from colleges after getting in that I was like, I need to see these emails. Can I just have your login? So I've been looking at his email. So I think it's great to have a separate email address. And then this is my advice. Let them take a gap year if they need it. They can travel the world, which I know someone who did, or they can just get a job if they're not quite ready to go to college. My kiddo wasn't ready to go to college. Kind of had a bit of a not exciting year being home, but man, it was the best thing that my kid could have done. And by the time he went to school in the fall, was so excited to be there, where if he'd gone the year before, he just wouldn't have been. It was really, really great for him. Okay. And a few more to bring us to the end. These are a little kind of first one's a little biting. So Lisa Damore, who's a clinical psychologist who specializes in teens, this is paraphrased, but said, getting into a dream school is as likely as winning the lottery. It will happen for some people, but it is really hard. So again, have that list. Make sure you've got lots of options. And I love this last one. Breathe. There are hundreds of colleges. There's definitely one for everyone. In the United States alone, there's over 4,500 schools. So just breathe, because you'll get through it and you'll get there and it'll be great. So okay, I'm going to stop sharing that for now. And we did get a couple questions in the chat, but I'm going to go to our questions that I got ahead of time first, just so we can get to those. And then please put more questions in the chat as you want to. first question that I have is, what if my student is applying undecided? Is that really okay? I'm going to turn it over to Mariah and Julie.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you. And thank you for that awesome presentation. Lots of good and valuable in the trenches information. So yes, it is okay if your student is applying undecided, but it's not okay to be applying without some developed intellectual curiosity. So things you want to think about: has your student developed the ability to find academics interesting? College is an academic institution after all. Have they spent time pursuing some sort of intellectual interest? So the more you can develop this specific strong academic capacity, the stronger the application. Another thing that I always like to tell my students is this, and I'm going to caveat this saying it's a little bit different when you're dealing with impaction at UCs and Cal States, and we'll probably get to that later. You're not signing your life away when you apply to colleges. College is meant to be a time when you evolve and change and explore new subjects and horizons. So if you say you're going to be an English major or are interested in pursuing English in college, nobody from the admissions committee is going to follow you around throughout your college experience, waving your application at you saying, but when you were a teenager, you said English was important to you. No, we're just talking about right now, what you've studied or pursued up to this point and what feels interesting to you now.
Great. What if my student's not a top student and hasn't, I mean, they want to go to college, but it hasn't been, I think back to me, I knew I wanted to go to college, but I had no clue what I wanted to do. And I don't know if I was super curious in high school, but I was like, well, I guess I'll just go find out. I heard Brene Brown recently say what she says to her kids is, I want you to go to college and take lots of different classes so you can figure out what you actually like. And I thought that was brilliant. But I mean, do you recommend just doing PCC if I'm not that intellectually curious, or is it still, I should still apply to regular college?
No. I mean, I think that the truth is, college is about exploration. It should be. I mean, when you think about what high school students are involved in, I mean, they know 5 subjects, basically, year to year. That's what they've been exposed to. I mean, no one has taken, or very few students have taken, anthropology and sociology and all of these things, and the world opens up when you get to college in terms of academic and intellectual pursuits. I think what Mariah was suggesting, which is true, is that there are a number of applications where students are directly asked, tell us about something that interests you, tell us about some, idea that kind of fascinates you. And it doesn't have to be something that they've experienced in the classroom. It can be something that, from the world or from their extracurricular activities or anything like that, that has really made them pause, and ask questions. And those are the things when we're working with students, for example, we always try and get at, because, when these academic institutions are making choices, they just want to know that a student has that interest, has that capacity to, want to find the answers to questions, want to explore, even if they don't know what it is ultimately that they want to do. And most colleges, just so you know, I mean, I would say, I don't know if this stat is totally correct. I don't know where I'm getting it from, but I think it's about 50% of students end up changing their major when they get to college. It's a huge percentage, at least half. So I think colleges understand that. It's just about, making sure that as they're applying for this academic opportunity, that they're sensing some sort of interest in having an academic opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that we kind of laughed about, I don't know if you all watch Modern Family, but there was a Modern Family once where Haley, I think is the one who was writing her college essays, and she's like, I'm supposed to write about a struggle, and Mom, I don't have a struggle. So her mom puts her in the car, drives her to the top of this mountain and says, hey, go get that thing. And then leaves her there. And she's like, what are you doing? She's like, now you have a struggle. Now you have something to write about. So I guess where my question is coming is, what if your kid doesn't have huge struggles. What would, the essay feels like it's really important. How do you figure out what to write about when that's the case?
So I read applications for Occidental College for about, I'm going to age myself, for about 20 years seasonally. So I have read thousands, no exaggeration, thousands and thousands and thousands of essays. And I will say that the ones that tend to stick with me are often about small, mundane topics, that it does not have to be this huge changing the world. I've had a crazy challenge. Sometimes those essays are wonderful and give you real insight into who a student is. If they do have challenges, being able to give context is fantastic. But, one of my favorite essays that I ever read was a student who wrote about boxes, moving boxes, because it was like a lens into her life, because she had moved a few times, over the course of her life. And it was about what was in the boxes and what those boxes represented and the items inside. And often those are the ones that stick with you. That was probably 7-8 years ago that I read that essay, and I still think of that. So you absolutely don't need, a huge life-shattering event to have an effective essay. It's really just a window to get to know a student, a single window where we can sense, who is the student? How does the student think? What's the student's perspective? How is the student recognize their own growth story?
I love that. We had a friend, and I'm not outing anybody because they don't live in South Pasadena, whose last name was Wiener. And so he wrote his essay about how hard it is to have the last name of Wiener.
I have a friend.
I love that.
Too, so I understand.
I thought it was brilliant. I'm like, you can laugh at yourself. You're really showing that you have a sense of humor and you get it, but this
totally
is what you. Yeah, it was pretty great. Okay, so let's go to the UC question. Why do UCs why are they so hard to get into?
So Mariah, I don't want to take up. Do you want to start?
No, please. We're gonna just go in a hodgepodge fashion.
I'll take this one because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Because this was a very interesting year with UC applications. I think we're all seeing the kind of crazy randomness, it seems, in terms of how campuses are making decisions. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of how we got here. So know that it was getting harder for a long time, especially with some of the rising campuses like UC Santa Barbara. UC San Diego has been difficult for a while, but, I think UC Santa Barbara was starting to get, was basically on UCSD's heels in terms of being super selective. I would have parents being like, I remember the time you could just walk onto campus the first day of classes and, just sign up. I think there was a huge divide psychologically between what parents remembered and what students were experiencing. And then the pandemic hit. And the pandemic really shifted things in big ways for all colleges, but I think the UCs specifically. Because what happened with the pandemic is that a lot of colleges went test optional, which meant, and that was a result entirely to the fact that students couldn't access testing. It wasn't at first a moral decision or anything like that. It was literally like, test centers are closed, so we can't ask students to submit. And all of these colleges were going crazy behind the scenes. How do we do this? We've never done this before. We've always leaned on testing. So the UCs had to figure out a way to come up with a system, and they had been, ironically, very, very much tied to testing for a long time, to SATs or ACTs. So they had to figure out their own process. And in the middle of that, I think what a lot of colleges started to do was say, this is really an equity issue in addition to an access issue. So, in terms of equity, this conversation had been happening for a long time of, certain students have access to test prep and all of these things that make it easier for them to achieve at levels that other students can't. So they decided to go test blind across their entire system. And while that is wonderful in a whole lot of ways, and I think they are doing a whole lot in terms of, really creating a more equitable admission space, it has made it more random, and there's been more variability because there is one less data point that they can use in making their decisions. So that is one piece of it. And then the second piece is because they went test blind, and this is a trend that we're seeing at all the colleges that went test optional, the number of applications to the system increased because students who wouldn't have been competitive in the past because their test scores started throwing their hat in the ring for campuses because it was no longer going to keep them out. So what we saw at the UC system is that the applications rose 10% between pre-pandemic levels and now. So I do have these stats written. I am not just a savant walking around with this, but the 2019.
You're pretty savant-y.
Okay, I'll claim savant. So in 2019 to 20, there were 218,000 applications submitted, and this year there were 240,000. So 10% increase over the whole system. So I will say, the UCs have plans to increase the number of seats for in-state students. They want to increase by 33,000 seats by 2030. We don't know the timeline of that. They've talked about maybe, decreasing the number of out-of-state students who they're accepting. And really the majority they're still mostly taking in-state. The out-of-state students is about 18% of the total system, but they might drop it down to like 10%. And they're also thinking creatively about how do we create more spaces on these campuses? Are there ways we can increase the residence halls? But there are like a lot of considerations that they have to think about when doing this. But just to sort of, wrap this up, because I know this is a long explanation. I will tell you, I had a student this year who got accepted to Harvard, who got accepted to UPenn, who got accepted to Berkeley, and got waitlisted at UC Santa Barbara and UC San Diego. So what I am saying to families who are like, how do we predict the UCs? This is totally crazy, is you can't, is kind of the answer right now, unfortunately. So you have to think about them as their own category, not as reach matches or savers. So apply broadly across the UCs, because there is still, differences in terms of acceptance rates. So you want to apply broadly if you know you want an in-state option. If you know you want an in-state option, also think about the Cal States, because those are still, more predictable. And just think about them in their own column. So instead of thinking like reach, match, safer, and you're going to have that balanced list over here, UCs, you also apply to them, but just have them in their own space, so that you're not thinking, well, UC Santa Barbara was supposed to be my target school. Because honestly, after seeing those results, I don't know what to tell. It was the same application that UC Berkeley got as UC Santa Barbara, right? So it's not like there was anything wrong with the application. It was just, those were the decisions they made this year.
Just to clarify, when you say 240,000 applied, that's individuals who applied, not how many.
Yes. Correct, because it's only one application, remember, for the whole system. So yes, it's true that I could have been counting like per campus, right? But no, it's applicants.
How many UCs do you think you should apply to? I mean, I know some kids who checked them all off and paid this $70 or whatever it was. It was crazy, and kind of got into Merced.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to do that. You don't have to check all 9 boxes, but, think about them in terms of, well, if you want to know, you have a UC option. And again, I'm saying this, I don't know the student's stats, so it's hard to guide like, any given person, but I would say, think about either Riverside or Merced as one of the options. Think about then how many others you want to add. I know that for students who have financial need, I think they get 4 that they can apply to with a fee waiver. It's just, again, excuse me, you can, I would say it really varies across, families and what, their end goals are in terms of how many to apply to.
Yeah. There are a few follow-ups, as you can imagine here. Do you know anything about the wait lists for the UCs? Because it looks like maybe a few years ago during the pandemic, a lot of people were getting in off the wait list. Now last year, not so many.
So what the wait list is, Mariah, do you want to take this? I don't want to over.
No, you're doing great. I mean,
Okay.
Basically the thing to think about in terms of wait lists there are so many factors that go on that we couldn't possibly predict because we're not behind closed doors. basically what happens with the wait list is students put in their deposit to go to a school. And then, schools are able to assess how much of their class they've actually filled. So they're going to see at that point if they have spots left over. Then they're going to start making calls off their wait list. Some student who is already enrolled or put their deposit down for another school might say, great, I'm in UCXYZ. I'm off their wait list, so I'm going to take that spot. Then the school that they had already put their deposit in all of a sudden has a space that they thought was going to be filled freed up. So the waitlist process can really go throughout the summer. You're not guaranteed to find out right away if you're taken off a wait list. And because there's so much movement going on between campuses, between schools, we can't really say definitively whether this year will be a good waitlist year or not, because it just varies year by year with students' preferences and choices.
Yeah, that was perfect. I have nothing to add to that. That's exactly right.
So there's a question, if for example, UC San Diego is their kid's dream school, should he think of going to PCC and then doing a transfer?
Okay. Yes. So that's a really interesting point. So, I mean, and what I would say is it's not a bad idea to apply outright, to enter as a freshman, knowing that this might be a contingency plan, because, no harm in trying even, but I will say the thing that the UCs still do incredibly well is they really put aside a large percentage of seats for transfers. This is a mission of theirs. They want to be taking students out of the community college system. So that's really good news for students who are thinking that might be a possibility that they want to consider, because what they would do is they would take 2 years at community college. It's very important that if a student is thinking about this, that they're talking to a counselor at the community college or someone else about the courses that they need to take in order to be prepared for junior year entry, because the UCs only take transfers who have 60 credits or more. So it's only junior year status. So they have to have had their general ed requirements fulfilled and, lower division courses for a major. But there are programs that are in place like the TAG program, which is Transfer Admission Guarantee. So every campus other than Berkeley, UCLA, and UCSD are still doing this program, which is if you meet their criteria, which is not crazy. I mean, often it's like you have to have a 3.6 GPA and you have to have taken, a few courses that they say you take. If you do that, you are guaranteed a space at this particular UC campus. So you basically have this contract with UC, but unlike early decision or a program like that, it's not binding. So you can still apply to other UCs, you can apply to private schools to transfer, you can do all of that, but you have your seat at a UC. So there's this, that program exists. Again, they are, I think, contractually supposed to take 1 transfer student for every 4 first-year students. So, often they are actually like looking for transfers as opposed to first years where it's so crazy competitive to get in. So I still think this is one of the best possible ways if a student knows they want to end up at a UC. I've seen students who would not have been qualified for a UC end up at UCLA or UC Berkeley, because really the timer resets when you start community college. And if you have your eye on the prize, then it's not for everyone, right? Like it has to be a student who knows what they want and is driven and is going through the process. But if you do know that, it's really amazing because it's like a whole second chance. And they're really looking for, high achieving transfer students.
Yeah, I think it's also a really great option for students who could just benefit from 2 more years to figure out who they are, save some money. There are just so many reasons why this is a great choice. And I know when I personally was applying to college, and I think the stigma has definitely diminished, thank goodness, because it really is the smartest thing in the world to do. But when I was applying to college, it just felt like, oh, this isn't as nice of an idea or as prestigious. And really, I look back and I just think how much money I could have saved, how much more I could have learned about myself before being far away from my family. So I would really just commend people who make that choice as making a really mature choice, as opposed to, not going to a 4-year college and that not being as fancy or whatnot.
Can you explain tag work and how that works? There's a couple questions of just like
The tag program.
yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit.
I almost wonder, I sort of want to just find the website and put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So essentially it's a transfer guarantee program. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. I'm just pulling it up right now. And it is, so the UCs, this is just Irvine. Hold on.
I can look for that as you speak, Julie.
Great. So it's basically any of the UC campuses other than UCLA, UC Berkeley, and UC San Diego. They all have this program and they set their own parameters, and they say, if you have these certain criteria, you can, basically fill out this form to be a tag student, which is you meet the criteria, you have a space at our school when you hit your time of applying. So it really is a guarantee of a space, but again, it's not binding.
So for the ones that don't participate in it, can you still transfer into those schools? Or
100%. Oh yeah. It's still, transfer is still open and very, very possible for all of those schools. It's just a program to help students know that they have an option.
Okay. And just to put a plug too for everybody, a couple of years ago, and I think it's still all very relevant, we had someone come in and we did a talk called Why Community College. If you look on our YouTube page for the PTSA, you can see her presentation. It was a great presentation from someone who went to community college, wasn't quite ready for regular college, and did a transfer to UCLA. And it was the best decision of her life. So she started a nonprofit to tell more and more people about it. So just look at our YouTube page and you can find that as well. It's really good. Okay, I'm going to move along. I'm going to go to some of these other parent questions that I got before. Is there a minimum number of APs a student should be taking to get into a top school? Let me actually just, I'm going to say the next question too, because they're both related to APs. So we might as well just cover it all. At our previous school, they limited the number of APs a student can take throughout their entire high school career. But here at South Pasadena High School, I'm seeing some kids are finishing with more than 7 APs. Is there a difference between a student who finishes with 7 and 10? And how important are the numbers? And with everything else, it's not possible to schedule that many APs without sacrificing something else. So
absolutely. Again, this is just going to be our catchphrase of the evening and frankly of the entire college admissions process. There's so much that's nuanced and contextual based on a student's unique situation, the other classes they explore, their interests that they pursue outside of school, their schedule, their family responsibilities. So nothing I say can account for each individual's unique circumstance. But what I will say is this. When colleges review your application, they're really looking at the courses that you've signed on for in the context of what's offered at your school, the typical course load at your school, as well as how you've performed in those areas. So you're going to want to think about what the typical rigor level is at South Pass that is getting into these colleges that you're targeting. So how does that compare to most of the students in your class? What have you seen so far as trends? As far as differences between 7 to 10 APs, I mean, man, that's a lot of APs, number one. And number two, we don't know what's going on beyond those academic selections and what students are doing in their worlds and their communities that bolster those choices in their candidacy. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, it's so hard.
It is hard. And also, don't walk away thinking we're not standing here telling you that your mental health and your high school experience and all of that is important. It just frankly is. College is obviously important, I mean, this is what Julie and I do for a living, and, so much growth and opportunities available through college, but it's simply not as important as your sanity, happiness, health, well-being.
100%. And just to answer sort of that second part of that question. So, when a student applies to a college, they get a high school profile attached. So they start to understand, okay, well, what is offered at the school? Are there restrictions or requirements in terms of what students take? There's a lot of context in that that helps them and evaluate. So if a student is at a school previously that is a much, there's some schools that don't offer APs or, any sort of rigorous courses. So, that's hopefully understood in the context of an application being reviewed. Oh, they were at this school where this is kind of what students do. Now they're at a different school that might impact, what we're seeing in terms of totals, certainly across 4 years. So again, what Mariah is saying is like context is super important. It's not that there's one size fits all. It's this, understanding of what is a student experienced, what have they been exposed to, what are the opportunities they've taken advantage of, like all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if a student, for example, is super interested in psychology and their school doesn't offer AP or honors psych or anything like that, you can always look into courses at community colleges too. It's a great option.
That's great. I just put our high school profile in the chat in case anybody hasn't seen it. It's on our counseling webpage on the SBN Tigers. So you can take a look at what ours says. So out of curiosity, if we had less APs at our school, would that be better for our students to get into college?
It's a really interesting question. It's, impossible to know, right? But what would be happening is they would be looking at, okay, well, what do students take to challenge themselves? So if it's not going to be APs, it might be honors classes, or it might be whatever, South Pasadena had decided, this is what we use in order to help students challenge themselves in these academics. So again, they're just going to look at what the high school offers and advises, and then how students, have like what they have elected to take in the context of that.
So kind of as a follow-up, is it good advice if your student really is into humanities, really likes English, really likes history, to advise them to take APs in those, but maybe not take APs in math, because that's not as big of an interest for them? Will that harm them in their pursuit of college if they don't push as hard in something that they're not good in and not interested in?
So I would say that first and foremost, challenging yourself in your interests is like primary. Like that I think makes sense and would be part of the application story, right? If you're applying and everything in your application reads you are humanities and you love humanities and all, you have extracurriculars that align to that, and it will make a lot of sense. I would be remiss if I said there weren't a percentage of colleges that were looking for outstanding generalists, as opposed to, just doing. When I applied to college, there was no expectation that that every student did everything well. I mean, when I applied, I was a humanities student, in social sciences. I was not a math person, and I didn't take AP math and I didn't take AP science, right? But now there is a little bit more of this expectation that for the top schools, students are taking hard classes across the board. Now, when we're talking about this, we're talking about a very small select group of schools, which is why we keep coming back to this idea of fit and not limiting yourself based on these brand names, right? So, I think everything is a balance, and everything should be a balance. And as Mariah said, everything needs to take into consideration a student's interest, happiness, mental health, physical wellness, right? All of these things. And, that's why like releasing the attachment to some of these schools that might be like, you need 10 APs and you need to have APs across all subjects, that can be very healthy.
Yeah. And I'd also say that, for a student who looks at some sort of requirement of the 10 APs or something that's equally staggering, a student that would probably thrive at such an institution would look at that and be like, oh yeah, that's normal for me. As opposed to somebody who sees that and is like, this does not feel doable to me. And because of that, it's like, it's not just about getting into a school. It's about finding your people and your rhythm and vibe and supportive culture at the school once you get there.
Yeah, I love that. I always say to people, like, there are certain people that are Stanford people.
Yeah, let them do it.
Let them do it. They're not to say I'm a bad person or not a type A in my own way, but like, I'm not a Stanford, like I'm thinking about this problem all the time. I'm kind of like, hey, what am I going to go do and have fun? And they might think about the problem later, whereas maybe they're doing all of it at the same time. I don't know. There's a definite brain. You know, those
And
people.
all are beautiful.
Exactly. They're all beautiful. Oh. Okay, so one other question somebody said is, my son can't do a third year of language that he chose, which is Chinese. What is likelihood of gaining acceptance? And I know you can't really answer that question, but would it be helpful to get into a UC if he does now 2 years of Latin at PCC to add on to that Chinese?
Right. So typically when the UCs or any college talk about 3 years recommended, they're talking about the level 3. So for example, there are some students who take middle school language. They're not expected to take 3 years of language in high school. They're expected to get up to level 3 in high school, right? So when they talk about 3 years, that's kind of what they're talking about. So it can't hurt to take 2 years of a different language, but it wouldn't be equivalent to a third year, if that makes sense. I mean, one thing to think about, and again, this is all where we say context, right? Like, what is a student taken other than language? What is a student's interest? How is that reflected in the application? But if there is this desire to get that third year, and again, it's hard to know like why the third year wasn't available. I don't know if it's because it's not offered at the high school. You could consider something like online or at community college. In fact, at community college, if you take 1 semester, that's equivalent to a full year of a high school language. So, just something to keep in mind if it's of interest to take the third year of Chinese. But again, it's literally impossible for us to know because all the pieces of the application matter.
Yeah. Okay. Going back a little bit to the merit aid, how do we figure out if a school offers merit aid?
Google, it'll tell you. You just look it up, and if they tell you they offer it, they're not lying.
Now, I will tell you, for one of my son's schools, they said we offer it to the top 10 to 15% of the people that we accept for the year. You never know,
Yeah,
right, what that top 10 to 15% is, but certainly if you didn't get any, you weren't it.
I would say in those situations, what's so important and something that I'd wished I'd experienced when I was applying to college is this is why it's so important as a family to have transparent conversations about financial circumstances. That doesn't mean you need to divulge every detail to your children, but it is important, to realistically talk about, look, this school is fantastic, and it's really only a possibility if this much money is offered. If it isn't, it's just not feasible for us. So I think that level setting of expectations can be really helpful in those situations.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider that I forgot to mention is, depending on their major, I mean, the conversation we're having with the school my son is going to tomorrow, we're actually meeting with an academic advisor before he says yes, because he has 5 APs and he did fairly well on his 5 APs, which was a lot of APs. For me, I thought that was a lot. But I think he can graduate a semester early, and that's going to be huge for us to save money. But we're confirming that before we say yes, because I'm like, let's confirm that, because we can't afford the 4 total years.
Really smart.
Yep.
So there are ways around it. I mean, you can do summer classes, which probably cost the same, but maybe you've already got housing, so you're not paying for housing again. I mean, he and I came up with a list of things when we went over the colleges, and I'm like, here are the ways that you're going to have to save money. You can become a resident advisor. My sister loved that. You save on room and board when you're, I call it babysitting other kids, which is why I didn't want to do it. But my sister loved it. She did it for 2 years, and she got that's how she saved money when she went to college. I just graduated early because I had some credits. And so I was like, that's how I'm going to save money because I don't want to be an RA. But there are ways to do that kind of stuff. Of course, there's scholarships too, but those are hard to get.
Yeah, no, that's really true. And having conversations with financial aid and talking through all of the possibilities, that's really important because things like having a triple your first year instead of a double can save money. There are all these hidden things that you wouldn't necessarily know unless you actually talked to someone financial aid and said, is there anything we can do that helps with the cost of this? So I think that's all really, really smart, brainstorming that list.
Yeah, it's rough, but it's good practice for them for when they get there.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about the WUI? So WUI for everybody out there is, well, I'm not even going to say what it is because I don't know what it means, but I'll let you talk about it.
Yes, it's the Western, it's WUE. It's like the Western Unified something. I'm forgetting the E, but it's
Western Undergraduate Exchange.
Thank you. What it is a set of colleges and universities, or mostly universities, to be honest, in the West that have an agreement with one another that under certain conditions, so, sometimes it's every single major, sometimes it's only certain majors, you can get in-state tuition at these out-of-state colleges. So for example, at the University of Utah, if you're applying from California, regardless of major, if you get in, you get basically in-state tuition offers. Sometimes you have to apply by a certain date. So you want to check the website and figure out, what are the conditions of this exchange? And again, as I said, certain universities only do it for certain majors, not for the highly competitive majors. So you want to make sure, and it's not all the flagship universities, like University of Utah is their flagship, but it's not, I want to say like Boulder is not on there, but Colorado Springs might be, there's certain conditions like that too.
Yeah, it's great. There's even some in Hawaii. So first thing you got to pay for flights. So then what is demonstrated interest and does it matter on applications?
Right. Do you want to field this or do you want me to? I'm fine either way.
Sure. Demonstrated interest are ways that it's literally what it sounds like, ways that your student shows that you're interested and invested in a school. So to the earlier point about creating a college email, every time you sign up for tours, info sessions, anything like that, that's all flagged as ways that you're demonstrating interest to a school. Now, some schools value demonstrated interest more than others, but there's never any harm, one, just in getting more information about a school, but two, in proving that you are in fact invested in what a school has to offer. I think that, what do you think, Julie? Anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. And like demonstrated interest can be anything from choosing to interview if a college offers interviews, to engaging with an admissions officer at a college fair, attending virtual programming, visiting the college if possible, but also opening emails. And that is something that students wouldn't necessarily think of, right? And that they don't do naturally, as we all know. But they can track that. They can see, okay, how many students opened this email? Did they click on the link to find out more about the program that we're talking about, right? So fair or no, this information can be tracked. And it's just a really good idea to pay attention and just, especially for the schools you're interested in, showing that engagement. It can be a really, really good sign to the college, because the reason it matters at all is because these colleges care about yield. And we haven't really talked about yield, but what yield is that after the decisions come out and the decisions are back in the students' hands, they're trying to fill their class. That is their primary goal. And they've accepted a certain number of students, assuming a percentage will say yes to them. But as Mariah mentioned, if that percentage is different than what they expect, they go to their wait list. It becomes a very, very hard process of filling their class. So what they're trying to gauge is how interested is a student? What is the likelihood that the student will say yes to us? They can't ever know that for a fact, but that's why these factors come into play, is that they're trying to decide, okay, if this student seems really like they love us, that can be a really good sign. There are certain colleges, obviously, that don't have to worry about that. MIT does not have to worry about demonstrated interest, right? Like there are a lot of colleges that they're like, we'll have plenty of people say yes to us. But then there are a ton of colleges that really care about this. And it's really important in terms of their functioning that they get students saying yes. So
that's great. That's really good to know. Okay, so let's say I have a junior and we're about to embark on all of this. Is there can you walk through a basic timeline of what we should be doing? Is there a basic timeline? I mean, my kids weren't ready to write essays until about 2 months before they had to. So we had a lot of, and they didn't want help. They wanted me to help them. So my kids, we had, these really intense fights at first because I was critiquing their work and really bad. And then they got to a point where they understood that I was critiquing their work for a reason. And we actually had a lovely time doing it. I mean, once we got past that, it was lovely, but they weren't about to start writing essays in the summer. But if you were to say what people should do, can you give us a little bit of a timeline?
Sure. So you're going to want to think about this from spring of a junior's year, as that's where we're at right now. So right now, what you want to start thinking about is creating your list of colleges, visiting if possible. The summer, and even starting right now, it's not too early to start thinking about your UC PIQ essays, as well as your personal statement essay. Those are really going to be fleshed out and developed throughout the summer. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, now is a great time for you to speak to teachers who might be writing recommendations on your behalf. It's great because you're fresh in their mind as a student, and also they haven't filled up in terms of capacity. So over summer, you're going to continue to work on that writing, shaping your list, and hopefully you're going to have that list finalized by mid to late summer. Of course, you can always add and subtract schools here and there, but the more you know what your school is going to look like, the more you're going to know what's required of you in the process. So if you have that pretty much crystallized towards the end of summer, you're going to know what you need to do for those applications. Another thing to think about might be potentially applying to a rolling decision school in late summer that accepts applications during the late summer. It's not all schools, but some schools like ASU do that. And what we talked about, what I said a few minutes ago about having that list kind of concretized, you're also going to have a sense of what deadlines are, and that's going to help you organize your work. So things that are due sooner, you'll want to start working on those things sooner, funnily enough. And then just to give you a little bit of context, deadlines tend to range from November 1st to February 1st. Again, some schools like to go by their own rules and don't completely abide by this, but that's generally what you're going to find. And that's pretty much what's ahead of you.
Yeah, so supplement, so the Common App goes live August 1st every year, but you can fill out the Common App, the majority of it, before it goes live. And because the actual application part will roll over into the new version on August 1st. So if you want to get a big head start, you can fill out the Common Application. The Common App essay, the prompt right now. I mean, there is a topic of choice option. So really anything goes with the Common App essay, although we recommend looking at the other prompts to get a sense of what they're looking for, because all of the other prompts suggest personal growth stories, thinking about your own growth, your own development, right? So that is a good sort of a clue as to what they're looking for in terms of these essays. But you can start that now. You can start the UC personal insight questions. Those prompts are available now. So the more you can start on the pieces early, hopefully what it does is it takes a lot of the pressure off down the road. And then August 1st, when the Common App goes live, then you can find out all the supplemental questions. So most of the Common App schools will ask for supplemental writing. Usually it's not a full length other essay, although Harvard does ask for that, but most schools are going to have short answers. So it'd be like anything from 100-word answers to maybe 400-word answers that are specific to that school. So why do you want to attend? Tell us about an extracurricular experience that's really important to you. Again, when we were talking about that intellectual curiosity, a number of them are going to ask, like, share an idea that's really interesting to you or something that you love, whether it's in or out of the classroom, right? So that will be coming on August 1st. So the more you can kind of start at least some of the components ahead of time, it won't feel so overwhelming when you finally are like, okay, now I know like all the things that I have to do.
Yeah, and I would also really encourage you to plant the seed in your students' head that these essays are really about revising. When we have essay deadlines in school, it's often about just like getting the essay done, turning it in, just meeting the deadline. That's not really how these essays work, because they do require introspection and reflection and more creative writing than your students have been exercising muscles preparing for. They've been writing more analytical and less reflective. So it's not something that they can do the night before. I mean, they can, but I would so strongly recommend against it.
Yeah. And it's really, I mean, they're not going to think so. But it is a cool process. Like it's the whole college app process. If you take the scariness out, if you take the white noise and the like fear, it's about reflection. It's about taking stock of what you've done to this point, and you are now in control. You are now deciding, what do I want for my next chapter? That is, not something that a whole lot of students have had the time or space to think about. And so it's a very, when we work with students, there's a reason we do this work. It's very cool to watch students kind of think about their own journey and figure out what they want for themselves next and self-reflect. And they really, really grow over the course of, I think there was a comment made about how they change over the course of senior year. That is so true. I would add, like, from spring of junior year to, when they're going off to college, it's worlds different. So it is, if you can look at the process as a milestone process, as the sort of transition to adulthood, I mean, semi-adulthood, right? Because it's college, that then it becomes less intimidating and more, interesting and really, useful when it comes to personal development.
Yeah, it's definitely different essay writing than my kids had ever done. So it was hard. I want to be mindful of the time. We only have about 5 minutes left. So what I wanted to turn to was really about questions about college fit. Now I have something I'm going to put in the chat that is from Challenge Success. And it is a checklist that is really about, like, what does your kid want in a college? It's a great checklist because it's like, these are the must-haves. These are the, I don't want it at all. And this is the, it could be nice. So it helps you go through and start that college search. But as we said, there's like 4,500 schools. So if you're not going to go to if you're not getting into a top one, or now we're fearful we're not going to get into a top one, how do you cull that down? What is your best advice for figuring out how to choose where to actually apply without applying to 60 schools or something?
Yeah, so it's true that when you start, it feels nearly impossible. There are so many schools out there. The key is to start with what you know. So you're not going to know everything, nor should you right away, but you probably know and I'm saying you as in a student will probably know one or two things. They might know what locations they, especially want to target, at least at first. They might know their major, they might not, but they might know they need to be near a city, or that's like ideal for them, or, that they play a sport and they want that, there's going to be something that you can anchor the beginning of the search to. And that's really useful because that kind of grounds you for figuring out how the list gets shaped. Once you have those anchors in place, I mean, it's really just about educating yourself on what are these schools like. So, there's several resources. There's Big Future, which the College Board puts out, which has a college search tool, which you can put in criteria and see what kinds of colleges, come up as recommendations. The FISC Guide to Colleges, that's like our Bible. That is a fantastic book because it's written by a third party, but it's also like descriptions of a college. It's not just stats. So that's really, really useful. Visiting colleges, and when we say visiting colleges, we know not everyone can get to every college. That is totally understood. But even visiting local colleges, I mean, we are so lucky to be in a location where we have examples of different kinds of colleges. There's UCLA, there's USC, there's LMU, there's Occidental, right? You have, real examples of what a liberal arts college is, what a big state university is, what a private university is. So even if you just get to those as like a proxy for, what kind of school feels right? Does this feel too small or too big, and why? That can help you in shaping the list moving forward. And I would just say, as you move through this process of research, and certain things come into focus, and again, it's going to take a time and conversation and learning more. Just to think about and this is probably the hardest for me to explain or express, and I do it every year to students who are the most capable and the, academic superstars and all this, that really what we're talking about when we're coming up with a reach target target likely list is it's about percentages. It's not about your abilities. It's really a numbers game. And it's kind of like what that quote was about the lottery, right? The reason that a dream school is like a lottery, and when we talk about dream schools, it means different things to different people. But let's say that top set of colleges, which might take under 10% or under 5% of students, what we're really talking about is they have to deny 95% of students, right? If you flip it, and you think, okay, well, that's the task of this college, to figure out how to say no to the way vast majority of students who apply. Then it becomes, okay, this isn't just about, it's not a referendum on how qualified your student is. They're saying no to thousands of qualified students. So when you're thinking about this list, it's about how do you figure out the percentage likelihood. So you're hedging your bets and you're understanding, okay, there are schools in the mix where we have a reasonable likelihood of acceptance based on what they've done historically. And there are schools on this list that, it would be, there are no guarantees in admissions ever, but it's quite likely that the student would be accepted. So that's how you think about it. It is not about, it's hard, and I understand that, but it's not about whether a student is qualified or no. It's about thinking about it in terms of percentage likelihood.
Yeah, that's great stuff. One thing you said in there made me think of one last piece of advice from a parent.
Yeah.
Schedule time to talk to your kids about college. It's so hard not to bring it up every time they walk in a room. So with both my kids, I had to say on Sunday afternoons, we're going to talk about it. And I would make a list all week long, like, oh, I thought about this. Oh, I thought about this. And it was so hard. But if they bring it up, you can talk about it, which is great when they bring it up, because you're like, oh, I'm ready, because I have questions that I wanted to ask you. But we had to get to a point where my kids, they were avoiding me because they knew college was coming up. So I would just say to everybody, try and schedule time, because they're going to just not want to be around you if you kind of act
Kristen,
like
I don't want to create more work for you, but you've had so much good advice from your own experience. I feel like you have to put together a list for everyone on this chat, because between the email address, which is brilliant, and like all of your different, I feel like you need that list.
All advice I've gotten from, I think somebody called it my snowplow parents. I love this idea, is that we all need a snowplow parent who's done it before us.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Here's the path.
And so it's all stuff I've gotten from my snowplow parents that were ahead of me. It's just, I keep passing it forward because I was like, that was really good. It was really good. So that's why I wanted to do this tonight, because I knew there were things that some parents, like we all just go, I wish I'd thought about that. I wish I'd thought about that. And, once we get to our third child, once I get to him, well, I'll probably forget in 4 years, all of this stuff. So I have to go back and watch, but, it's just, it's a rough time, but it can also be really beautiful. And my sons and I had some lovely times chatting about memories and about who they are and who they've become and where they're going. And, we had some really knockdown, drag them out fights, but we also had some really beautiful times. So it was great. So I'm going to put in the chat, if everybody who's still here would please take 2 seconds to fill out this form for Julie and Mariah. I am going to put a plug in for them, not because they asked me to, but because I want to, because I think they're amazing. If you do need help, they have some writing workshops. If you fill out this form, they can email you about those. There's absolutely no obligation. They are here because they love what they do and they just want to help everybody, which is awesome. I also have some other things as you're filling that out. I'm going to put in these things that are happening in the next week. Challenge Success has some really great talks about college. They have one that's called Why Fit Matters More Than Rankings. They have one that's called A Healthier Approach to College Admissions. I think you have to pay for that one. You can't just watch it, but you have to give a $10 donation. There's another one. I don't know if you know who Kelly Corrigan is, but she apparently went around to like 15 different colleges in the last year and like interviewed people about what's the point of college in 2023. So I don't even really know what she's talking about in this one, but that's later this week. It's Wednesday. It sounds really fascinating to me. So I thought I would just share it with all of you. So I'm going to put all of these different links. It's a lot, sorry, in that chat. So you can copy them over and sign up or do whatever. I'll leave the Zoom open for a couple minutes so you can do that. But I just want to thank you. Julie and Mariah, you guys are awesome. It's been so great seeing you again. If I don't see you soon, I'm sure in a couple of years I'll be back talking to you again.
Thanks, Kristen. No, we really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak. And this is our weird niche world, and so we're always happy to share what we know. It is we understand how difficult it can be to sort through. So
yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great night.
You.